Hey everyone, welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Michael Regan along with Kathryn Peterson, and we are excited today to talk to you about a topic that I think has been a buzz topic in the real estate industry over the last probably 3 to 6 months. We won't get into the details of some of the lawsuits that are going on, but perhaps the downhill flow of those lawsuits is where we will be best to spend our time. And these lawsuits are rooted in some things that ultimately impact the way real estate agents may earn commissions in the future. And our intention is simply to talk about if some of those things roll all the way out into the industry, what impact will that have on listing and buyers agents and the lenders that they partner with? So we're excited to unpack this topic with you and look forward into some things we can do. So Kathryn, welcome back. Good to see you again today.
Good to see you. Thanks, Michael. Great introduction. I think I'm excited to talk about this topic. It's a juicy one, so I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people have probably spent some time over the holidays speculating over what does this mean? And like any change, it brings out all spectrum of responses. You'll see some
Mhm.
people who are excited about it. They see it as innovation, some that are freaked out about it because it's going to completely disrupt them. And then a lot of people in the middle just confused or maybe waiting, like, let's see what really happens. Because as we know in the legal systems, just because lawsuits get filed and even judgments get laid, that doesn't always mean that's the final. Sometimes those things get
Right.
brought back around. So I think we'd be wise to stay away from some of the legal implications. And let's talk about the practical ones. So as you think about maybe what we've seen so far and your experience over the last 20 years, who do you think this is going to impact, and what's the potential impact we might see all the way down to the buyer, the consumer, the one who actually needs to own these homes and finance them? How do you see that?
Yeah, so for me, I think that now that the conversation has started, I don't know if it will stop. So I think that it's like you open the mystery box, it's hard to close it again. And I think that we're starting to see conversations happen more often. And I think that no matter what happens, I think that it's something that agents should be working on anyway in their business. So I think that's why I think it's a really good topic, because whether it impacts the consumer, the agent, truly, I think that the cat's out of the bag a little bit, and that's probably the wrong way to say it, but the conversation has begun and it's not going to stop in one form or another. So I think what I'm hearing from local agents here is just that they're concerned about it and they're starting to think about things like what their agreements at the company is going to look like and how they're going to approach the conversation with the client on both the buying and the listing side. So I think that'll be really where I'm excited to dig into, is a little more of that stuff of, hey, let's talk about the conversations that we all should be having with our clients on both sides of the transaction, and really bring that full circle so that everybody's comfortable and everybody has a full picture of what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to tip this topic off. Is let's be open to having those conversations when agents are
Mhm.
beginning to talk about them. It's very tempting, and I've heard some brokers shutting down their agents, like, just don't pay attention to that. It's that's a long way off. That may
Mhm.
not even happen. And while those may be potentially true statements, it's probably not a good idea when people have concern to just shut them
Mhm.
down. I think we need to
Yeah.
provide some space to dialogue over these things, to
Yeah.
roundtable a little bit. And yes, we do need to be forward focused, and we've got some practical tips we'll touch on here before we close out our episode. But to open the topic, I agree. As the audience is paying more attention, and as the media is starting to post more articles on these lawsuits and the potential impact that they could have on the future commissions that would be either defined and or shared, I think it's fair to say the consumer's paying attention and they're starting to raise their hand and say, wait, you mean I don't have to pay 3% to each agent when I sell my house? What does that mean? So if you heard a consumer today, let's maybe
Mhm.
work it from that angle backwards. If you were a consumer today selling your home and you knew about this, but you didn't know what it meant, and you decided to bring it up to your listing agent, as a question. How do you think agents should be handling that question of, hey, do I have to pay 3% or what are my options? How should we help agents walk into that conversation with their customers?
So first, hopefully it's addressed before the client asks, right?
Mm.
But let's say that doesn't happen and let's approach it from there. Because I think first, I'm just going to speak a little bit to that. Our job is to inform clients and help them answer the questions they don't know they have yet. Okay. But so I think that's number one, because
So
you don't
be
want that question to
proactive.
come up, right? To be proactive. I don't think you want that question to come up 3 weeks into a listing,
Yeah.
because that's a very different conversation at that point. So I think if you haven't and the client asks, it is good to be prepared for that question. And I think something of, hey, in the past, 3% has been the standard, but let's talk about what it looks like both sides, if you did and didn't, or did something in the middle. If you aren't paying the buyer's agent that 3% portion, 3% goes to buyer, 3% goes to listing agent, what does that look like? And let's talk about the buyers that you may or may not have in that situation and what that looks like and what that might mean for the people who might be able to buy your home. And I think that that's a good place to start the conversation, because I think that obviously if there's no buyer's commission, you may be cutting out VA. You may be cutting out some of those other options that are just difficult if the buyer does have to come up with the 3% agent buyer commission. So I think that that's a really good way to get there with people and say, hey, here's your choices. Now, if it's going to be a cash transaction, that's a different conversation, but every transaction is different, just like every seller is different. And I think that's hopefully that gives a little bit of a start to the conversation.
Yeah, so my takeaway from that is, and I didn't mean to interrupt your flow by saying be
No.
proactive, but I guess the idea is simply what you said is don't wait for the question to be asked, because that puts you in a position of now defending either the old way or even defending what you intend to do in the future, versus laying it out as information because you're the advisor and
Mhm.
giving them the opportunity to learn and understand as
Mhm.
we progress throughout this experience together, what your options are and what values get tied to the option you choose. I
Mhm.
think that's, in my mind, where agents really need to get excited about this instead of scared of it. Is this is an opportunity for them to really clarify the value of what they earn, because the assumption may be just based on the raw dollars,
Mhm.
especially with the value of homes today. You start doing the math on that, and these look like big sums of money in a lot of markets. But if you can tie your value to it and really
Mhm.
explain what that commission is going toward in terms of, like you said, creating buyer demand, creating the right types of buyers for the type of
Mhm.
home that you're trying to sell, including their financing options from cash all the way down through, conventional VA, whatever may exist. Those conversations up front will serve, I think, both the agent and the homeowner through a much smoother process. So that's great. Takeaway number one is be out in front of it. Don't wait for it to come
Mhm.
to you.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's bad to have a list to say, hey, as a listing agent, this is everything that we do. There's a story I'd heard at a conference or something about how someone lost a listing because one of the agents said, I'm going to put it in the MLS, and the other agent didn't. And so the seller assumed that it was not going to be put in the MLS by one of the agents. They just didn't bring it up. So I think that there's certain things that you can point out the obvious. Hey, here's some things we do when we list your property. We make sure to go ahead of the showing and turn on the lights, or some of those things that you think they might know, but that they may not know because we've been doing it for so long, we forget the value that we provide. So I think it doesn't hurt to sit down in some free time and make that list of, hey, here's everything I do as a listing agent. Here's everything that I do as a buyer's agent. And I think that that can be a good start for, hey, here's some things I want to bring up to you so that you know what my package provides.
Okay, so let's play a little bit darker scenario out. What happens with the
Mhm.
homeowner who says, yeah, 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 that's nice, but I don't see the value in that. I'd like to pay 2% or 1% because I know I have that option and I'm willing to give up some of that list of values that you just created for me. How should agents be prepared to handle those conversations? Because in the past, that was rare. I mean, it happened, but it wasn't common for
Mhm.
a homeowner to be in a position of strength. They may now feel emboldened to push back on some of that value. How do we want agents to prepare themselves for the harder conversation?
So I think it's first practicing that conversation with people so that when it happens, you're prepared and ready. Because that is a difficult conversation. And you might say, I get it. Sometimes things are negotiable and we may have to approach it as we see it. So if we have a buyer who you find, or we have a buyer that that maybe, you have to take a lower price, maybe we can cross that bridge when it happens. This is the max that I can negotiate, which is, and whatever you say the max is what's going to happen. I can tell you right now. So that you can kind of set it up ahead of time. And it might be, hey, we've made a policy that we aren't going to take less than this, and this is why. And you can certainly talk to other places. I would say that I saw a pretty surprising stat that that buyers are, or listing agents are going to be expecting more negotiation, and that they wanted to work with agents who are willing to negotiate the listing commission. So you want to be a little bit careful. So it's definitely a fine line. I think that the more you talk about it up front, the more it gets settled right at the start. So I think you really want to be careful about it.
You know, it's interesting. I hope most of our agents that are watching and listening could understand this perspective. You know, for years and years and years, as we've done valuations on properties, and we've come in and helped consumers understand the marketable value of their home when we're ready to list. We do lots of detailed analysis, but at the end of the day, the home is usually worth what someone will pay for it.
Mhm.
And so we've understood that in the real estate community, it's probably in our best interest to understand that same attitude applies here. We can have the conversation about commission, we can tie it to the value, but at the end of the day, the value of that job will ultimately be determined by what someone agrees to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so the more pliable we are to get to that point, I think the more opportunities we'll tend to have. It's not a problem. You mentioned some, brokerages may take a firm stance. This is what we're paid. This is what we're worth. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, as long as we recognize that means a percentage of our consumers will say,
Yeah.
well, then I am going to go explore some other options.
Yeah.
And as long as we've thought through that ahead of time, I think we're in a stronger position, as you said in your first advice, to be proactive. It's when we
Mhm.
don't feel confident in those and we haven't practiced some of those conversations early on that our nature is, well, I just don't want to bring it up. And I think that's going to be the harder road to
Yeah.
take.
Absolutely. And I think you could do things like a test, like, hey, let's list it with no buyer commission and see what things look like. And we will list it for 2 weeks, see what that looks like, and then we'll reassess and
Yeah.
relist it if we need to. I think if you have somebody that's adamant, you can approach that and see how that goes too. I think at the beginning we might see some of that happen where you have an agent that says, okay, let's just make sure we're really clear in the listing and see how it goes.
All right,
So
let's flip the coin over. You and I both know that in real estate, while cash transactions are certainly a percentage and a reasonable percentage of the overall activity, we still live in a world where affordability is our greatest challenge, and most of our home buyers aren't blessed with the opportunity to pay cash. They have to finance. So how will you see this impacting our lender partners who work with these agents and these consumers who are all having this dialogue and the value play is being defined? What impact will this have on our lenders, and what can they do to stay proactive in the same conversation?
I think a big part of it is education. We immediately got calls of, well, great, the lender will just pay it for us. And that's tough. That's not our profit margin. So it's difficult just to build into the loan because that cost goes somewhere. So we'll see if there's some different lending products that come out. I think a big thing is us being able to discuss that with a client to say, okay, great. Let's say you have 25% down. Okay, if you find a property that doesn't pay buyer commissions, let's talk through that. What might that look like? And potentially run those numbers for people, and have them be prepared for that conversation on the other side as well. But I think right now we so lenders have been in a unique position over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, where we've really had to face this through a lot of different rules that have come across our plates, a lot of which people just aren't even aware of, but our compensation is essentially regulated in one way or another. So we've had to kind of face these same challenges. So I think if anything, we can help talk people through how a lot of this has gone for us, and a lot of it has changed the lending environment a little bit and force lenders to be more professional in a good way. So I think it's a little bit of perspective, but a little bit of buyer education, and also a little bit of we'll kind of see what comes. I do feel like we'll see some programs or strategies come out as well.
You just said something a moment ago that I think is really key, and so I want to bring it back up in case
Mhm.
our audience missed it. Is if lenders have gone through this experience a little bit ahead of some of our agent friends and partners, this, in my mind, as a coach, is a great reason to have partner planning meetings, to
Mhm.
get together with your agents one-on-one or in small groups or in broker meetings, and really talk through these things ahead of time so that we're not only discussing the bigger picture, the implication that we talked about, but maybe even some of the strategies that you were just starting to illustrate in those examples, so that they see that there are creative ways to handle these. And while every transaction is different, it's probably not in our best interest to figure that out when we're in the middle of that transaction. Let's come in
Mhm.
ahead of time with a sense of the direction we're hoping to go, so that we've already thought through all of the twists and turns that might exist. And to the consumer, we appear as we intended, which is as a team, that we're here together working in your best interest. And it never appears to that consumer that, oh, the agent and now the lender are haggling over who's going to get paid what. That would seem like a terrible face forward, and we can avoid that if we just go back to your first advice. Be proactive. Go have these conversations with your agents now, ahead of Mr. and Mrs. Smith writing an offer.
Exactly. Exactly. No, I think that's good. And I think it's good if you're at an agency that it isn't approaching this head on, then you got to make your own plan. So just
Mhm.
know that really every agent, every lender is their own little company and their own planner and their own marketing person and all that stuff. So really you can do a lot without needing to wait for that. Make a list of your, value prop. Make sure you're really clear on your buyer presentation and your listing presentation and some of those things too. And that's honestly stuff that your lender can help you with as well.
That's great. All right, so if we're bringing this into some sort of direction as we look forward, we've
Mhm.
hinted at some things that might be advice. We've hinted at some things that might be pitfalls, things to avoid.
Mhm.
Anything that would be on the table for an agent, buyer, or listing, or a lender, that you would say, don't forget this, because we all know the market conditions that we're currently in, and we're all well aware of the season that we've been going through over the last couple of years, as our economy is trying to find its legs again. Any advice you would give that we haven't touched on before we tie this one out?
I would say you're probably thinking about it more than the client is. And that you can get into this thing in your brain where you catastrophize, right? Like, oh my gosh, they're doing this. I'm going to get asked this. I'm going to do this. Typically, we think about things way more than they actually happen. So I think just approaching it in a calm way and your mindset towards it will be huge, because agents do bring value to the transaction. Lenders do bring value to the transaction, and you don't want to forget that. And you do want to look at it in a positive way so that you're not coming across as defensive or scared or all of that. So I think that's another thing to think through is, and I think that's why some managers are saying, hey, don't worry about it. It'll be fine because they're trying to make sure the agent doesn't get all like worked up about it. But you can care about it without getting upset about it. And those are different things. So I think it's some of it is important to just think through the mindset. And I think if you have a good plan in place, it's easier to have that better mindset.
That's a great segue, Kathryn, because that in my mind is key. A plan would suggest that you've put some thought into this ahead of time and you've prepared. I tell people all the time, I don't want to get into prognostication. I want to
Mhm,
be into preparation.
mhm.
Preparation just tells me I've read, I've discussed, I've thought, I've strategized. These are things that I have total control over and
Yeah,
can, in fact, embrace to give myself the confidence I need to go out and face the unknown without appearing rattled or without appearing afraid. Because let's face it, most of our customers who are buying and selling homes, they seek a professional for a reason. They want someone who not only
yeah,
knows what they're doing, but can remain calm at a time when things are, as we've seen in these transactions, quite unpredictable, if
yeah.
that's maybe a fair word. And that's part of what excites us about being professionals in this industry is the unpredictability. It's fun to navigate things that aren't just on a production line, but our
Mhm.
consumers don't do this every day like we do. They
Yeah.
might do this once every 3 to 5 years, and it's potentially frightening for them if they don't feel that sense of confidence from us. So preparation is the key. So I love that you said, have a plan. I would segue that by saying, and stick to that plan. It's so easy at this time of the
Yeah.
year to create a plan and then get completely lost from that
Yeah.
navigation, just weeks or months into the year. Commit yourself to go back to that plan. It's okay to make course corrections and adjustments as market conditions change, but it's not okay to draft a plan, file it away, and act like you just checked the box and we're never going to look at the plan again to see, am I sticking to my commitments? Am
Mhm.
I actually executing on my disciplines? Am I ultimately tying out my expenses back to my revenues so that I know what's really working?
Yeah.
As agents and as lenders, these are pretty practical advice, but really fundamental if we're going to navigate this with confidence.
Mhm. And everything will be different, as we know, in 6 months anyway. So it's good to continue to reevaluate because the market conditions change so much and your clients might change and the market changes. And so reevaluating is wise.
Okay, so that's maybe a great place to put a button on this is let's for everyone who's listening out there and whether you are a professional in the real estate industry buying or selling real estate, whether you're a lender who's helping people finance that real estate, never forget the you and your unique value proposition. At the end of the day, there's only one you, and if you are bringing your value into every relationship that you have, whether it's with the agents you work with or the consumers that you're serving, and you're reminding them regularly a simple statement, what makes me just a little bit different than every other lender
Mhm.
or agent that you happen to know is this. And if you're really clear on what makes you a little bit different and you're really clear on why that's so important, no matter what changes in the months and, seasons to come, your confidence remains strong that you can figure out where your value fits in that evolution. And I've seen that over and over again from our top producers. It really what separates them from so many of the average producers is the mindset and the belief that what they do is valuable and who they are and how they engage with their audience is unique. So I work really, as you know, I work really aggressively with my clients to get clear on their unique value proposition because that's the one thing the market conditions can never take away from you.
And one thing I've worked on, because it's so hard for you to know what makes you unique, because you kind of assume everybody's like you. So I have been asking some clients lately, hey, what makes me different than other lenders you've talked to? And that's a difficult question to ask, but it is fascinating. So don't hesitate to ask. If you're not sure, it's okay to ask people and say, hey, why am I different than other agents? Or why have you worked with me 4 times over the years? What makes me different and unique? And why do you keep coming back? I think that that's a valid question and it can provide some insight.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that exercise. I've done that myself, and I've coached it with others. And you are right. It's going to either give you clarity and confidence when they give you positive feedback, or it'll help you figure out how to sharpen
Mhm.
when you get feedback that maybe is less clear than you'd like it to be. At the end of the day, that's such a great tool for that advice. Is just go ask a few people, and you'll be amazed at what you find. It's usually not what you think it is. It's not your newsletter that you print every month. It's not your big marketing campaign that you spend or the big party you host every year. Not discounting those things, but so often the feedback you get is something that you think is so normal, and you would
Yeah.
say, "Really? That's what makes me different?" And don't forget that sometimes the simple is really the key.
Mhm.
So listen to
That's
that
good
advice.
advice.
Love that, Kathryn. I'm so glad you landed on that one. Folks, I realize we danced around this topic with quite a bit of diversity in the directions that we went. We could spend most of the day doing this, but I don't imagine most of you want to spend all day listening to the podcast. So we'll put a button on it here. Please add your comments below as you have questions or thoughts that you'd like to contribute to this conversation. And I'm pretty sure this topic will come back around later this year as we start to learn more about how agent commissions evolve in 2024. But for today, this has been the Building Bigger Lives podcast with Michael Regan and Kathryn Peterson. We're so glad you joined us today, and we look forward to catching you on an episode very soon.
This is Building Bigger Lives. Look for podcasts regularly on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Instagram at Building Bigger Lives. Thank you for listening. We are so appreciative of your support. This episode was edited and produced by Scott Higby at Studio C. Support also provided by Building Champions.